So these were the pictures I took while on my trip to America, all taken with my Mamiya 7 and Kodak Gold 200. Now most of the time when taking pictures I use black and white film, just because I can process that myself. But I think for some applications colour does just make much more sense. And I do think one or two of these photos did come out quite well. So I'm going to talk now about the various cameras and lenses I bought while in America. And here it all is. Some things I was specifically looking for, and some I just happened to come across. Mostly from eBay, some stuff from one thrift store. And there were a couple of bad purchases, but generally I'm very happy with everything. So I'll talk about everything in the order I bought it, and the first thing I bought was this Argus C3. Now the Argus C3 was a low-priced rangefinder camera produced in America from 1939 to 1966. Over 2 million were sold, making it one of the most popular American cameras in history. But what particularly motivated me to get one was its many memorable appearances in films over the years, spanning all the way from the Philadelphia Story in 1940 to the Harry Potter movies. So I bought the camera on eBay America as untested, and unfortunately when it arrived I found it was not fully working. Although the rangefinder was accurate and the lens was clean, unfortunately there was a shutter issue. So although the shutter does fire, it only fires on one speed, no matter what I set the shutter dial to. Now there is some good information online about repairing this camera, and I've taken it apart to try to work out what the issue is. So I've looked it over and I think the issue is being caused by this, the speed regulator mechanism. So what this does is regulate how long the shutter remains open, and you can see as I move this gear forwards and back, there's this point in the middle where it sticks. So if you watch, I release the gear, and it sticks, and to get it moving I have to nudge it with a screwdriver. Now I'm fairly sure this is the issue. I've tried cleaning and lubricating the whole assembly, which hasn't helped, so perhaps one of the gears is just damaged or worn, and I need to replace the whole assembly. I only paid $20 for the camera though, so it's not too much of a loss, and perhaps eventually I'll be able to find a replacement for the damaged part. Moving on though, thankfully my next purchase ended up being much better, and it was this Killfit 150mm f3.5 lens from the mid-1950s. And there it is in the catalogue by the way, and you can see it cost $164 back in the 1950s, which is close to $2,000 today, so a pretty premium lens. And if you've seen some of my previous videos, you'll know that during my project to recreate the setup we see in Rear Window, I started collecting these 1950s Killfit lenses. And so I'm glad to have acquired one that I didn't have before. And this lens turned out to be in great condition, no haze or fungus, which is quite rare for a lens of this age. And I only paid $40 for this lens, and I think one of the reasons these lenses are maybe undervalued nowadays is that to mount them to any camera at all, you do require an adapter. And these adapters can be a little bit difficult to find. But over the years I have managed to acquire quite a few of them. So this, for example, is the adapter for VisiFlex 1, and I think I'll probably do a test of this setup in a future video. So on to my third eBay purchase in America. It was this Exactor with additional lenses, and unfortunately this ended up being one of my bad purchases. So just like with the Argus C3, everything was purchased as untested, and that is always a risky strategy when buying cameras or lenses on eBay. So I'll start by talking about the lenses. So first of all, this Biotar 58mm f2, one of the classic lenses for the Exactor system. Now externally the lens does look pretty good, especially for its age. Bringing in a torch though, we can see quite a bit of haze, and this is more or less expected. It is rare to find unrestored Biotars which are completely clean, and I have taken apart other Biotars in the past to clean, and it's not too difficult. So moving on now to the next lens. It's this Triatar 135mm f4, and unfortunately just like with the last lens, although at first glance the lens seems to be in pretty good condition, as I bring in the torch you can see there really is a lot of haze. And there's a second issue which you can see as I try to focus the lens. The helicoid is almost entirely locked up, so with a lot of force you can just about move it a tiny bit, but this means the lens is basically unusable until I can repair it. And finally onto the last lens. So this is a Schneider Kreuznach Telesena 180mm f4.5 lens, and this lens was a lot of the reason that I wanted to buy the camera in the first place. I hadn't seen one before, I think it's fairly rare, although I don't know if it's worth much. And again this lens has some haze, and it will need some cleaning before use. So those are the lenses, they all need a bit of cleaning, but they certainly could have been worse. So now onto the camera. It's an Exacta Varex 2A from the late 1950s, and testing the shutter, everything seems to be working well. All the speeds sound fairly accurate, and the advanced lever seems smooth. And if I open up the camera now, you can see one of the most interesting things about this particular camera. It has this sticker on the inside of the back, which tells us it was originally sold by a camera shop called Photokino Goetz in Würzburg, Germany, presumably sometime in the late 50s, and I wonder how it ended up in America. But now on to more testing of the shutter. So you can immediately see that while one of the shutter curtains is nice and flat, the second shutter curtain has this crinkled texture, and this is always a bad sign. And sure enough, as I shine a light out through the shutter, you can see all the pinholes in that second curtain. And while this is unfortunate, it's not particularly unexpected, and actually all the Exacta Varex 2As I've ever seen have this same issue. I heard that they changed the material they used for making these shutters for this model, and it ended up not lasting very well. And if you're thinking of getting an Exacta, I'd avoid this model and get an earlier one, like the Varex VX for example. I will eventually get around to changing the curtains on this camera. It is a bit of a lengthy process though. And now talking about cost, this whole setup cost me around $160, and even with everything being in less than perfect condition, it's not too bad of a price. I'd probably be able to sell it on for about what I paid for it. So now on to the third camera I bought. It's another eBay purchase, and it's another camera that was made in America. It's the Stereo Realist stereo camera, made from 1947 to 1971, and also the most popular 35mm stereo camera ever produced. You can see there it cost $159 in 1953, which is around $2,000 today, which is around 2.5 times what the Argus C3 cost. So a pretty expensive camera. So luckily this camera came to me in great condition. The lenses are clean, the rangefinder is accurate, and the shutter's working on all speeds. Now I'm planning on making a full video about this camera. It's very unusual, very interesting. So I'll just talk briefly now about how stereophotography is supposed to work. So on this camera you've got two lenses, placed roughly at eye width apart, and then the lens in the middle is your viewfinder. And when you release the shutter it gives you two images. And then what you do originally is place these two images, taken on slide film, in a special viewer, and then looking into the viewer it'd give you a bit of a 3D effect. And nowadays you can sort of replicate this effect on a screen. So if I place one of the images on top of the other, and then flip between them, you can see the 3D effect. And as I said, a full review of this camera will come soon. And as for cost, it only cost me $33 on eBay US, which I think for what it is a great deal. But moving on to the next camera, and my final eBay purchase, it was this, an Exacta 2 from the late 1940s. So the main reason I bought this camera was for this early black biotar, which is quite sought after. And I paid $160 for the camera and lens, and the lens on its own is probably worth a little bit more than that. And this one is actually in extremely good condition. Very clean, no haze or fungus. And now onto the camera. So it's an Exacta 2, as I said, probably from the late 1940s, and this is actually one of the least common models of Exacta, as it was only made for a couple of years. I think just 1949 and 1950. And even though there are maybe 10 years between this camera and the Exacta VX 2A we saw earlier, they are nearly identical cameras. And trying this one out, it seems to be working fine. All the shutter speeds sound accurate enough. And now I'll take a look at the shutter curtains. And the material looks perfect. I can't see any deterioration at all. And even when I bring in a torch, I can't see any holes. And as I said before, the shutter curtain material used in the earlier Exactas, for whatever reason, seems to have survived better than the material used in later Exactas. So if you're looking to get one, it's best to look at models pre-VX2A. So basically this camera is working well and in great condition. There is one small issue though, which you can see there. So the mirror there has lost quite a bit of its coating. And although it looks bad, this isn't actually too much of an issue. Even when mirrors are actually in very poor condition, they are actually still surprisingly usable. and you'll still get a pretty good image in your viewfinder. So overall, a pretty good purchase. And now on to the last items. Now these items I actually got in a thrift store, and I think I went to maybe 10 or more thrift stores while in America, and it was only in one of them that I found anything worth buying, but I think it still ended up being worth it. So I got this leather lens case and this old Olympus rangefinder, and I'll start by talking about the Olympus. So you've probably noticed that next to all the other stuff I bought in America, all made in America or Germany in the 40s and 50s, this Japanese rangefinder from the 1970s does stand out a bit. And although I wasn't in the market for one of these, when I saw the $10 price tag, I couldn't pass it up. So this is an Olympus 35RC from the 1970s, as I said, and especially compared to the other cameras I've talked about in this video, it is amazing the features Olympus were able to pack into such a small form factor. And I'll briefly talk about some of these features, but first the camera does need a battery, and the battery required is a 1.3 volt PX625. I don't have one of those on hand though, so I'm just going to use a 1.5 volt LR44 and just jam it in there with some paper and a piece of solder wire, and that should work fine. So going over some of the functions now. You've got your film speed selector at the front there, self timer lever there, and then the aperture dial, and you can use this dial to select either a particular aperture or switch the camera on to A, which is the automatic mode. And I'm going to select the automatic mode, and then on top you have the shutter dial. So that's all fairly standard, but what I really like about this camera is its viewfinder. So first of all, as I try to focus, I can see that the rangefinder seems to be working well. And if you don't know, with rangefinder focusing, you have a ghost image in the center of your viewfinder, which you have to line up with the rest of the image to focus. And that all seems to be working well here. But one thing I really like is at the top of the viewfinder, you can see there's a shutter speed indicator. And you can see that as I adjust the shutter speed dial, the little needle moves and indicates the shutter speed I've selected. And it's really not necessary to have that indicator in the viewfinder, but it's just a nice feature to have. But now to test the metering, I've selected my shutter speed, a 15th of a second, and as I depress the shutter release slightly, you can see on the bottom row of numbers, a needle comes out and moves through the different numbers. It stops at 2.8, which is the aperture the camera has automatically selected based on the shutter speed and lighting conditions, and I can take the picture. So my improvised battery worked, and the whole camera seems to be functioning well, and overall a very nice camera. And now on to the final thing, this old leather lens case. So I got this at the same place as the Olympus, and it cost me $30. And opening it up, you can see it contains not only more exacta lenses, but another biotar, making this the third biotar I've bought while on this trip. And it does seem like quite a coincidence that I just happened to come across this at a random thrift store. This biotar seems to be in pretty good condition though, but just like the first one I bought, it probably could use an internal clean. Moving on to the second lens case now though. Thankfully it holds a lens that I don't already have, and it's a Schneider Kreuznach Tele-Zenar 135mm f3.5, and it seems to be in extremely good external condition. And looking at the glass, that seems to be very clean as well. So another purchase I'm very happy with, and definitely worth a lot more than $30. And I did end up getting a surprisingly large number of exacta things while in America, but I think for pretty much whatever camera stuff you're interested in, rarer things will probably be a bit more common than in Europe, and things will be a bit cheaper too. But that's about it for now. Hopefully that was interesting. I'll just finish by saying I now have a Patreon, link in description, where I'm selling prints, so take a look there if that's something you're interested in. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.